The views expressed in this episode, as with all episodes of Sounds Like a Cult, are solely host opinions and quoted allegations. The content here should not be taken as indisputable. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only.
I want to start off by saying that I think they do a lot of good and can really help addicts and people who are struggling with addiction. However, there are some strange culty-like dynamics, especially when you are abroad. I was going to a 12-step program for sex and love addiction in New York and found it really inclusive, warm, welcoming, and super helpful to me at the time. I then moved to Europe and I noticed that they followed a different kind of protocol, which I thought was also a bit strange to begin with. I had always thought that 12-step programs more or less followed the same regimen. However, SLAA in Europe operates by the HOW system: honesty, openness, and willingness. When I joined the HOW 12-step program for sex and love addiction in Germany, I picked up a sponsor naturally. My sponsor then proceeded to tell me that I was not allowed to take my antidepressants. First of all, it's incredibly dangerous to just stop taking any sort of medication. And second of all, I didn't see how it affected my issues surrounding codependency. She even pointed out in the handbook that people going through the first 3 steps should abstain from alcohol and any other drug. Well, to me, taking a medication is not a drug, so I refused naturally. She begrudgingly obliged, but I know a lot of people in the program who actually stopped taking antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication.
I am a clinical social worker, and many years ago I worked in a substance use treatment program, and it was 12-step based. I cannot possibly express how unhealthy the environment was. Yes, due to a lack of oversight on the part of the hospital system under which it was based, but also because of the guy that ran it. It was the most perfect and terrible mix of somebody with an insane personality disorder, a history of substance use himself, which does not preclude you from being a good therapist, but for this guy, absolutely did. It was just a disaster in this program, like all the time. Laws were being broken, people were being exploited. I mean, the field of substance use is kind of young, and now we have really good treatment for it, but there are so many programs across the nation that are still left in this 50s kind of white man world. But suffice it to say that in this hospital system where we were located, we were the outliers. We were the substance use unit. Don't question the substance use unit. So nobody questioned it. And when I got there, I did, and it did not go well.
This is Sounds Like a Cult, a show about the modern-day cults we all follow.
I'm Amanda Montell, author of the book Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism.
I'm Isa Medina, and I'm a comedian.
Every week on our show, we discuss a different fanatical fringe group from the cultural zeitgeist, from CrossFit to the Kardashians, to try and answer the big question.
This group sounds like a cult, but is it really? To join our cult and see culty memes and BTS pics, follow us on Instagram at Sounds Like a Cult Pod.
I'm on Instagram at Amanda_Montell.
And I'm on Instagram trying to grow, so I would appreciate your support at Isa Medina, ISAAMEDINAA.
And feel free to support our show on Patreon at patreon.com/soundslikeacult, where our episodes are available ad-free.
And welcome to another installment of Cult Girl Summer, 5 weeks of bonus episodes where we share off-the-cuff convos, Q&As, footage from the cutting room floor, and much requested part 2s, aka this episode. We have been itching to dive back into this week's topic, the cult of 12-step programs, which is something we covered in season 2, but we were only able to tackle it from the perspective of our guest, who has had a very positive experience in this group, like AA and OA, groups for people recovering from addiction. But there are also lots of folks who have had culty experiences in these 12-step program groups for the worse, and a bunch of listeners let us know that they wanted to hear these stories too. And fair enough, because we do too.
Totally. I mean, I came to that recording that day ready to roast groups like Alcoholics Anonymous, etc., because there are a lot of culty aspects of these groups for the better. You know, for some people like our guest, groups like AA and NA and OA really have saved their lives, and that's 100% valid, and we would never want to illegitimize their experience. And that's why we didn't on that day. You know, we just had an authentic conversation with someone from his perspective. But then we realized that there were other stories to tell about the cult of 12-step programs. And I already knew that. But in the conversation, I started to second guess myself. Like, maybe I've been too critical of these groups.
Well, I also think, you know, we were approaching it from the perspective of one participant. So I don't think we didn't grill him. Like, I remember we really did grill him, but he
was just good at responding.
He was really good at responding because it was really in a de-escalating format. And that's what I ultimately convinced me that it wasn't that culty, because he wasn't offended by the questions that we were asking, and his answers weren't cagey.
Yeah.
He was just really honest. He was just like, if you feel that like certain way, you can leave and you can walk out of the program. No one is like making you be in the program. It was a really sound argument to me. But it's important to look at like specific stories and other things that people have talked about.
We're excited to do this part 2 because I want to explore the other side of things. And it's really tricky because people who do believe that Alcoholics Anonymous and groups like that have saved their lives might be triggered by criticism of these groups.
But also JF Harris, who was the guest we had on the episode, told me that a bunch of people reached out to him, people who like didn't know that they needed help, and they were like, thank you so much for that episode. Like, it made me go seek help because they had really bad perceptions of Alcoholics Anonymous or 12-step programs. They thought they were culty. And so they didn't even want to go into them.
And I do think that they are culty fundamentally, and we'll walk through some reasons why, but I don't think that that is a reason not to try them.
Yeah, I don't think, like, we talk about that all the time on the podcast. It's not necessarily a bad thing to be culty. Like, there are live your life cults and there are watch your back cults.
And at least how we've defined a watch your back is a group that you don't need to avoid at all costs. It's a group that might not be for everyone. In fact, it might be traumatizing for some people, but for some people it's great. And it's really up to the individual to determine what your limits are.
Yeah.
So we really just are making this part 2 in the spirit of balance.
Yeah, we love balance. Like we've said, I mean, we're literally taking this 5-week quote unquote break, but still doing an episode every week so that we can dive deeper, because in this 12-step program, like, we didn't have that much time to do deep research.
Yeah, that's the long of the short of it, is that we found this guest who was hard to find.
Because you can't approach people and be like, hey, heard you're an alcoholic, want to be our guest?
And sure, there are a lot of people who are public alcoholics, but a lot of those people are hard to access.
Yeah.
And here was someone who fell into our lap who was like, I'm willing and open to talk about it. And I walked away from that interview being like, I think that was balanced, but we now realize that it wasn't as balanced as it possibly should be. And because this is really sensitive subject matter, we just want to make sure that we're approaching it from as many sides as we're able to. Also reminding people to remember that this is an opinion entertainment podcast. This is not investigative journalism. We want to do these topics justice, but we'll link some resources on our Instagram for those who want to take a more formal dive into the subject. So a lot of the info in this episode comes from a qualitative study of the efficacy of AA specifically. The study is titled Exiting Alcoholics Anonymous Disappointed, a qualitative analysis of the experiences of ex-members of AA.
This was published by some mental health experts at the University of Sydney. We'll share it on our Instagram for those interested in diving deeper.
Existing research about the efficacy of AA has honestly been a lot like our prior episode. It's really reflected the experiences of people who have had positive experiences in AA, and that's great for them. And it honestly feels validating to us, like, because even scientific qualitative studies conducted at universities have focused on people in AA.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially because, like, I feel like their whole program functions around not speaking about AA outside of AA. So if you're a person who left Alcoholics Anonymous, then you're not going to talk negatively about it because you don't want to affect other people's chance that it could work for them.
Totally. And I think that naturally, if you haven't had an experience like this yourself, you wouldn't even realize that people have defected from this group and had negative experiences. So this study aimed to sort of like correct that by exploring the perspectives and experiences of people who've left AA and weren't super happy with their experience. And the study conducted interviews with 11 ex-AA members from the US, Australia, and England. And what they found was basically that while participants enjoyed a lot of aspects of AA while they were in it, in retrospect, they realized that they probably stayed in AA for a long time because they felt, and I quote, indoctrinated into a particular way of understanding themselves.
That's the part that I think makes it, and again, spoiler, because we already did an episode on this, I kind of think it's a watch your back still. We said watch your back, right?
I think your final comment was that addicts need to watch their backs
always
in whatever they pursue, which is fair enough.
Yeah, we talk about so many things. I literally forget what I said.
It was kind of genius because it was an amazing way of like circumventing the question at hand.
Yeah. And that's the thing is like the way that this is said, it said been indoctrinated into a particular way of understanding themselves. I think that's the key. It's how they see themselves, not how they see the world. So that only affects you, but that's bad. That can still be bad.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. No. So maybe in your mind, you think something would be a get the fuck out if you've ostracized a massive swath of the general population. But AA, according to this study, kind of does that in the insular world of AA.
Yeah, it's true. I think it's more so for me that traditional cults are a lot about how you see the world, and it's about convincing other people to join you. And there's never really that recruitment aspect to AA because they literally don't talk about it outside of it.
Yes, but I think it's just subtler. And they're not trying to recruit everybody because everybody isn't an addict. So their pool of recruits is a little bit smaller naturally.
It's important to go back to this study because I feel like it's kind of like our North Star in this episode.
Yeah, for sure.
But they said that their findings demonstrated a disparity between the idealistic principles in AA and the actual experience of participants. Mm-hmm. It's like the difference between what you thought AA was going to be and what it actually was. And I think it's so important that they mention that this was discussed in relation to a possibility of a bunch of different experiences across varying AA groups. And I think that's what's so hard to analyze about AA is that it is these groups of people that all associate themselves with this one organization, but they're meeting in different places around the world. And so every single group is going to take in the culture of the place where it's meeting.
Yeah, every group is going to have a slightly different culture because there is no centrally organized body. But I think there are through lines just by the nature of how AA presents itself. And I think we can walk through some of what these culty aspects are.
So I'm a therapist and I'm located in Denver, Colorado. And in my program at the University of Denver to get my master's in social work, we read this book in our trauma and substance abuse class. I remember in the book, there were quite a few of these treatment centers that followed the 12-step process, among some other things, and were extremely re-traumatizing for the folks who were in treatment. I think it's really interesting to think about the idea of the 12-step program being culty because clinically, there's just a lot of stuff there about the danger of what that can do and the way that some of these programs are contributing to these sociological trends with substance use.
Hi, this is Holly from Byron Bay, Australia, really culty place. My 12-step experience was with Coda. I did about 10 years ago for a few years. I went to a really beautiful women's group and then a few people from a big town came and they kind of started another Coda group and took it over and then had all these rules and they were very controlling with their sponsees. And even my own experience with Coda, I had real issues with sponsees. All my codependent issues basically were playing out in the Coda group. But I learned so much and I'm so grateful for my years there and I did the 12 steps really thoroughly. But I did leave because I felt my codependency issues were just digging deeper in that environment.
I think the cultiest thing about 12-step programs is that they straight up ask you to just admit your powerlessness, that they ask you to admit that you're completely powerless and that the only thing that can help you is what they have.
I've always thought about what would I do if I developed an addiction? Because A real turnoff about 12-step programs for me is that they're fundamentally religious. Like baked into their literature and their big book is talk of God. I think that like at this point in the United States, like of course lots of organizations are going to have Protestant roots. That's just like reflective of our culture at large.
Yeah.
But I do think it is a little bit problematic. And I know they say that your higher power can be whatever it means to you. But this was a group that stemmed from and was founded upon religious Christian ideology. And as like, you know, the atheist daughter of scientists, that just like does not work for me.
So I think devil's avocado time.
Oh, they don't know what devil's avocado means yet.
Oh, all right.
Yeah,
I've just been recording.
Explain devil's avocado for the people.
So I have started to be like devil's advocate in the podcast, but I hate the term devil's advocate because I feel like it's historically linked to people defending annoying things, and like the devil doesn't need an advocate. So
I think of like male libertarians.
Exactly. But to keep the podcast interesting, you know, we have to look at both sides.
Yes.
And I hate saying devil's advocate, so I've started to say devil's avocado, which I think is really funny.
I like it too. Sorry. I was just taking a sip of a beverage, but I meant to laugh.
No, but I actually think that the fact that it started out fundamentally religious and now they have transitioned into removing the word God and removing the religion out of it.
They haven't removed God.
They haven't removed God?
No.
So I think that's the way that JF described it for us. You know, he explained that they like changed the pronouns. They changed pronouns to they, them, and they've changed a lot of things to make it like more progressive and like more non-denominational.
I guess so. But like, can't you easily see how a group could change the language to sound more inclusive, but is still up to the same bullshit? It's like when the beauty industry all of a sudden decided it wasn't going to say anti-aging anymore, but it was still selling you the same ingredients so you wouldn't age.
Yeah, so I get that, but because it's like a non-central entity, the only thing that they have is the book as the central entity. So unfortunately, it's true that it is up to the culture of each community. So like, I feel like if you go to AA in Salt Lake City, for example, it's probably going to be a lot more religious than going to AA in like Silver Lake, California.
Oh, that is 100% true. You know? But if you're in the middle of the country, maybe you're just shit out of luck. That sucks.
That does suck. But I don't know if that necessarily makes it more culty, because unless that AA in particular in the middle of the country that you're going to is like recruiting you to like move to that city and stay in that AA, like you have the power as an individual to go back to your hometown and go to the AA that you feel comfortable at.
But what if you already live in Salt Lake City and you don't want it to be religious? What if you're, God forbid, a Jew, a queer Jew in Salt Lake City? You know what I mean? Then you're just like, this religion is just baked into your recovery. And, you know, this study is from 2020, and I'll just quote something that was said in it. Most participants in this study talked about their objections to the religiosity embedded in AA ideology and shared concerns about, you know, the primary text of AA, this big book that we keep referencing, being considered divinely inspired. There's this notion that problematic drinking is caused by a problem with one's soul. And there's this required belief in an intangible entity, whether it's God or something else, and meetings often end in the Lord's Prayer.
It is important to look at these situations where someone joined like at a younger age and then kind of like stayed for a while.
True.
How they changed as people before and after. And of course, in that time, they're going sober. So they already are changing in more ways than one. But it's like, how did it change them fundamentally, like their outlook?
And, you know, it's interesting, like getting sober is such a profound experience. I mean, I've had people describe it to me as like going through a second puberty. It's just like this transformation. And I think AA really enhances that transformation with a profound conversion event. Like we've often talked on this podcast about how brainwashing is often the way that cult manipulation is talked about, but really what's going on, according to the religious scholar Rebecca Moore, are conversion, conditioning, and coercion. And AA is really good at conversion.
Yeah, there was this specific story that stood out to me from this study about one of the subjects, fake named Harry. He was 21 years old when he first attended AA, and he was a member for 3 years. So there's a stark difference about how he felt about it at the beginning and at the end. When he was asked about his first impressions of AA, he responded, "My first impressions were, wow, this is great. I had found the answer to all my problems because I bought into it hook, line, sinker. So I thought, this is really great. You know, I really connected with this big book. I connected with everything that was being said in the meetings. I thought I had discovered the greatest thing to happen in my life, and everything was going to be okay from there on out. And here, Harry recalls how powerful his conversion experience was in positively impacting his mental well-being and sense of hope for the future. So while Harry connected intensely with the people and the ideology in AA, in retrospect, the conversion was kind of creepy, or that's how he sees it. Like, that term hook, line, sinker is really more of a metaphor to explain that there was a literal hook in AA that captivated him.
Yeah, and you see this a lot with classic cults. I mean, I remember interviewing people for my book who were talking about their experiences in cultish Pentecostal church atmospheres, talking about how, like, the first time they spoke in tongues, there was almost exactly this verbiage. They were like, this was the greatest thing that happened in my life. Everything was going to be okay from here on out.
That's true, but devil's avocado, and I know this is a serious subject. I'm like, I am going to use that term. My thing is, like, I don't think you can ever believe that everything is going to be perfect from here on out. And no one in AA is telling these people that. They are implying it because they want them to feel safe and they want them to be in a better space. But it's like, life is never going to be perfect.
Oh, that's 100% true. But I do think that the culture of AA implicitly claims that, like, this is the only group that can save you. And that's clear in the fact that there is no exit strategy. Like, remember when we first asked JF, like, what's the exit cost if you leave AA? And his, like, visceral response was, you die.
When we pressed him a little more, like when we pressed, like, are there exit costs? He was like, nothing happens.
No,
like, you can just leave.
I know, but I think that visceral response really says something about the level of passion that you have to have in AA. And I know this is a bad comparison, but, like, it really, really reminds me of acting school. Like, I spent one semester as a miserable theater student at NYU before I quickly left and went to a linguistics major. I'm very happy about that. But, like, they really do create this sense that, like, if you leave, you will be no one. And, like, sure, you'll live, or sure, you can figure it out if you leave. But, like, if you quit NYU Tisch, you will be no one. That's never said, but it is implied.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of fraternities and sororities.
Totally.
Like, if you leave, you aren't really, like, welcome to the date functions or, like, to hang out with your friends. But it's this unspoken rule.
For sure. And, like, think about it. It is so wild that AA is truly the only mainstream option for alcoholics, even though it is literally not medicine or science. It's just group therapy without actual therapists.
I totally see the cultiness in the fact that it's anonymous means that you can't really, like, create a community outside of it. Although, actually, JF Harris said that, like, he would start hanging out with his AA friend.
Oh, you only hang out with your AA friends a lot of the time.
I don't think that's necessarily true. It's just such a large program. Like, everyone has, like, a unique experience.
100%.
But I think, like, you can stop going to the meetings and you can still hang out with your AA friends. What do you mean?
This study said that many participants told the researchers that they developed such close, tight bonds with members in AA that were then lost when they left. And it was explained to them directly that if a person chooses to leave AA, other members, by and large, consider that this choice renders them incompatible friends, since they're then seen as having completely different beliefs or an unhealthy mentality, and they can't hang out with them anymore.
Yeah, I think, like, it's hard because it's like the exit costs are your newfound community. It's like your friends, your community, your support system. But there aren't other, like, monetary exit costs. You know what I mean? There's nothing, like, holding you down to stay.
Yeah, but there's nothing holding you down in so many of the groups that we talk about.
I am going more into hard watch your back.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of participants in this study not only said that they couldn't have relationships with those people in AA anymore, but they were, like, devastated about that. These are people who they were, like, so unbelievably close to.
Yeah, and this is an example of the in-group, out-group identity that the community experiences.
Absolutely.
Interrupting your regularly scheduled cult stuff. We wanted to mention one of our favorite sponsors, Athletic Greens. I truly do take this, like, every day. Athletic Greens I always take in the morning. It gives me so much energy, even though it's like just all greens and vitamins and minerals in it. But it helps me a lot with my digestive system because like I famously cannot go to the bathroom unless I'm like about to go on stage because I have anxiety.
We all just learned so much about you. Actually, I already knew every single last one of those facts, but Athletic Greens is great. It is basically a scoop of nutrient-dense powder that tastes really good. You just put it in a cup of water and it offers you all of the goody gumdrop vitamins that your body requires.
Yeah, I literally had to hide it from my roommate because he like took all of my little powder packets.
Beef.
Yeah, and I had to be like, hey, this is mine.
And your dad also loves Athletic Greens.
My dad loves Athletic Greens. He lives by it. He's like, I can't believe they're one of your sponsors. He's like, send it to me. I'm like, no, use the code and support the show.
Oh, yes. Speaking of that code, Athletic Greens is giving our listeners a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Vitamin D, I don't know if you heard, you need it to live. It's good for your brain.
Yeah, and famously, like the sun is not enough because my doctor was like, you're vitamin D deficient, and I live in LA. And they send you 1-year supply of vitamin D for free with our little code. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/cult. That's athleticgreens.com/cult.
And use that code to support the show.
So one of the cultiest things that happened to me during a 12-step program is we went out for fellowship dinner after a meeting, and I ordered a tiramisu, believing that it was only a coffee-based dessert. And when they saw it on the table, they like stopped the waitress and made a big deal and asked the kitchen to make sure there wasn't any alcohol in it. And like nobody knew. So they embarrassed me, took the tiramisu away, and had me buy something else. And I was just completely mortified. It was the biggest deal over a piece of cake.
Hey there, this is Riley. I'm in Colorado. My partner was involved in the AA program, and so I started going to Al-Anon, which is for, you know, the partners in the family of addicts or alcoholics. And at first it was great, and I, you know, made some friends and found some community. And then some of the messages that were being spread were kind of like, you know, it doesn't really matter if your partner drinks or goes off the rail or goes on a bender, you know, as long as you're solid and as long as you're okay. And it really was focused on like rugged individualism and not really on like community centering and healing.
Hi, my name is May from Boston, Mass. And as an addiction researcher who has spent a lot of time in recovery homes that use science-backed and harm reduction methods, I'd have to say that the cultiest thing about AA is the chip system. So losing your chips is a physical representation of the shame members face for not being on a perfectly linear healing path. So if they have a bad day and end up relapsing for whatever reason, instead of seeking support from the group, they might feel inclined to keep it secret, which means they end up using alone, which increases their chance of overdose significantly.
For some people, it becomes their family, their entire personality, and the only thing that people do in their free time. Other AA members become the only people they feel like they can trust and truly understand them, which can be a good thing for sobriety, but you could also maybe like lose yourself in that. It does remind me a lot of like replacing one cult with another cult or replacing one addiction with another addiction.
Totally.
Because especially if you're going to these meetings on a weekly basis, like that's a heavy commitment.
Oh, I know people in AA who go twice a day.
Twice a day?
They go to meetings twice a day, or they Zoom into meetings twice a day.
I guess if you're comparing like drinking or doing drugs, like heavy bad drugs for like your health, I'm like, not weed. But if you're doing bad drugs or heavy drinking and it's like ruining your life in like more intense ways, I guess this is a lighter, less bad addiction.
Yeah, because you're not going to die of an overdose of AA.
Yeah.
I would say that being an AA is better than being an active addict, like across the board. And by the way, like this is spoken from someone whose close friends and family have had great success in AA, who are participating in the cultishness of it for the better with self-awareness. I just know that like being an addict is such a vulnerable position to be in, especially if you're a young addict.
Yeah, I think it could be so much worse. You know,
I think it's such a cult.
Like, no, I think it's definitely a hard watch your back, but I don't think it's a get the fuck out. It's like a medium watch your back, because I think if you think about like how vulnerable the people are,
I totally agree.
And the structure, they could have literally created like the worst fucking cult in the world by now.
100,000%. I completely agree with you. I mean, this is Cult Girl Summer, so like the verdict is already out here. This is a watch your back. I completely agree. It is a medium watch your back. And there have been fringier, more destructive, get the fuck out level cults that have been based on addiction recovery in the past, like Synanon, the group that my dad was in. That started out as an alternative drug rehabilitation center for so-called dope fiends that later grew to accommodate people who didn't even have addiction at all, called lifestylers, and all the same rules applied. Children had to live separate from their parents. Everybody had to shave their head. And there are many, many more rehab programs, recovery programs turned fucked up, exploitative, religious, sexual, like terrible, terrible groups. AA isn't that far. No way.
That's why I'm just so honestly like impressed by AA, because it has been around for so long. I don't know. I think it's a testament to the goodwill of people that like it hasn't gotten as bad as it could be. I just think it's a testament to how a grassroots community organization can like really do a lot of good, and like it, not everyone is inherently bad.
Yeah, no, not at all. I don't think that at all. But I think that was expressed really well in our part one. Yeah. And now in a way, I'm the biggest devil's avocado. AA has become so central in our culture that it is often court ordered.
Oh, wait, it can be court ordered?
It can be court ordered. Each year, the legal system coerces more than 150,000 people to join AA.
That's crazy that it hasn't become an MLM, dude.
Well, I think there's not enough money being tossed around.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. It could be so much worse.
And don't listen to this if you're in AA. It could be so lucrative if people really wanted to. But
so I think that's the thing. It's like, the culture of AA remains stable for better and for worse because it has such deep roots. We've talked a lot about how it stayed stable for the better, but I think what's a little troubling is that there's not a ton of modern science incorporated into the program. There's so much left to study about addiction, and really AA has remained unchanged since the 1930s when it was first developed, even though it could incorporate new science coming in about how to best treat addiction.
Yeah, I feel like my biggest critique of it would be the onboarding and offboarding of the program. There really is none. It's like for some people, especially people who are coming from heavy addiction and aren't necessarily in a good mental space, they're not going to have the emotional bandwidth to self-learn the onboarding or read between the lines.
Totally.
That may be the lines that JF Harris talked about in our first episode. And because they aren't in a great mental space, with the offboarding as well, they might be, you know, perceiving social interactions a certain way. And so like it's important to have these like onboarding, offboarding, blanket statement things where like people can know that there are no exit costs, like blankly say it, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Although I think AA is, pardon the crudeness, so up its own ass, it wouldn't actually make those statements known. I mean, one of the quotes from the study that really stuck out to me was, several participants expressed that AA was not an appropriate environment to become mentally healthy in, as it was comprised of a lot of unhealthy people.
That's actually so true.
And it's something that JF, our guest on part one, actually said. So that's something that he obviously knows, but a lot of people coming in.
JF has really high emotional intelligence. So I feel like the way he answered the questions, he was like, oh, you can just leave. Or when you get there, it's really nice to hear older people's stories and think, oh, it'll get better. And then when you're there for a while, you hear younger people's stories and you're like, oh, that's how bad it could have been. So he's really good at perceiving in a good way, in a way that benefits himself.
It's kind of like someone who's really, really naturally good at a sport trying to give advice to someone who's bad at the sport, being like, just kick the ball.
Yeah.
Just kick the ball.
Exactly.
It's like, I'm standing there with a soccer ball in front of my foot being like, bitch, I can't.
Yeah, exactly. For some people who don't necessarily have that level of emotional intelligence, like they really do need those things laid out for them.
I also read in the study that a few ex-members reported that they were directly advised against pursuing certain hobbies and career opportunities, friendships, and family commitments because they should be going to AA related events instead.
Oh no. When you gave that example of knowing people who go twice a day, that's really intrusive. I go to open mics like a couple times a week, and that's like a lot of time. Going to a meeting 2 times a day.
I don't even floss twice a day. I don't even
My name is Katie. I was sent away, first of all, when I was 17 to a 12-step boarding school. Essentially, it was organized around the 12 steps and the 4 absolutes: honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love. It was some insane Catholic shit coupled with an actual cult called the East Ridge Group. So I was there for 2 years. We had to memorize 12 steps. We had to memorize the 12 traditions. We had to pray day in and day out. I had to write my thoughts down so I could read them in front of a big group of other kids and also staff members. Not only was it like AA for institutionalized teenagers, like at-risk teenagers, all of these local people were sober and like working at the school they thought of as service work, but essentially they were abusing kids on an institutional level.
The other element that I will say that's pretty culty about the program is you basically swap one addiction for another. You basically become addicted and obsessed with the program. I myself felt this, and I wasn't really realizing that I was like substituting the love that I was seeking from other people by going to programs regularly and getting the validation and love from other members.
So AA definitely also offers a framework that people can use to shape their sense of self and understand themselves. And I think that's great. And there's a lot to learn from that. But I think you need multiple frameworks to help you understand yourself. You can't just conceive of yourself using one framework. And a lot of participants in this study reported struggling with how narrow the AA framework was. They reported varying degrees of social control in AA, whereby conforming to AA's ideology did have positive social ramifications. But also, if you ever tried to challenge anything in AA, people might be aggressive towards you or ostracize you, gossip about you. And that was a concern that I think can come up in just any really high stakes, tightly bound group.
Yeah, I think something that we did push JF on, and he said, oh, I can totally believe that would happen, but he didn't have any specific examples because he has a positive experience, was like the power dynamic between older members and younger members or newer members.
For sure.
And there is this power dynamic between these members who have been around for a while and the newer, more vulnerable members. Like many participants in this study described that they had highly damaging relationships with the domineering, rigid, intrusive, or critical AA sponsors. And some participants said that these kinds of behaviors were actually counter to AA principles. Like the primary text states that there is no leader, but rather everyone is a trusted servant.
And that's so culty, right? To have a doctrine say something and then people go against it. Yeah. And I think one of the biggest consequences of that can come in the form of sexual exploitation. We had a lot of comments from listeners who talked about how being in AA as a woman is very different from being in AA as a man, and that there are a lot of like older sober members who will pursue sexual relationships with new members, oftentimes women, and that's sort of referred to with the slang phrase 13th stepping, referring to the 12 steps.
Aren't you not supposed to have a relationship within the first year?
Yeah.
But then that also feels like it gives this like kind of immediate green light for like after a year.
Oh God, it kind of reminds me of like when you groom an underage person and then the second they turn 18, you swoop in.
Yeah, and they almost want you more because they couldn't have you. Yikes. Yikes. Another point that we found in this study was the idea that they kind of break you down to build you up. I mean, that kind of makes sense. When you create such a general program, there are going to be varying degrees of addicts in these groups.
Exactly.
So if you're treating all addicts equally, you know, there might be people who are like in a better position and they're now comparing themselves to people who are like severe addicts and they're like, maybe I'm just as damaged as these people. There's this sense that you are like powerless against your alcoholism, and because you talk about these traumas, you're constantly remembering the worst versions of yourself. Mm-hmm. You're constantly being reminded, this is who I was and this is who I could become again. And so you're scared to leave. You're like, if I leave, those are the traumas that are going to come immediately back.
Totally. And again, like because there is this religious tie, they often attribute their powerlessness to God. Like, my higher power is the only one who can really control me. And that can really affect a person's self-esteem and sense of personal agency when you feel like totally ashamed and helpless over yourself. And it can also absolve you of taking responsibility for your past actions, you know?
Yeah, totally. I feel like because there are so many steps, it's like before you take responsibility, because you're not allowed to like apologize until you get to like a certain step, you're like, well, at least I'm going to AA. And it reminds me a little bit of when like people are in therapy, but they're not really like doing the work. They're like, well, I'm going to therapy. God. Yeah, but are you doing the work? Because therapy is not fun.
I can tell whose therapists coddle them.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so funny. And I feel like we keep switching off like whose devil's avocado in this episode, or at least like in our minds, because whenever you start to say something really critical of AA, I start to feel defensive of it. And I feel like when I start to say something really critical of AA, you feel defensive of it. And that just goes to show like how tricky and sensitive and nuanced this topic really fucking is.
Yeah.
I think the final thing that makes AA super culty is that it has a ton of celebrity spokespeople unofficially.
Yeah.
Like Ben Affleck has been in AA and Britney Spears has been in AA. And I think those people almost like glamorize it. And it is true that if you go to an AA meeting in LA, you like might run into a famous person.
Yeah, which I never knew, or else I would have started going earlier. But and I haven't gone. But
we should go.
Yeah, I'll go.
I'm like talking so much shit about it, but like I do love going to an AA meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go, I'll sit, I'll listen. Like I really do need to be like have an out of body experience every once in a while.
And I love human connection. Listen,
yeah,
I fucking love it.
Yeah, but it does go to show how like idolized it is in pop culture, because I, again, have never been to an AA meeting, but because of like TV and film, I actually know how it goes down. I know everything that happens in it, and I know the culture of it. The roots run deep.
The roots run so deep. So I think this is all to say that like AA can be wonderful for some people, but studies are increasingly showing that it's not as effective as it seems, and there should definitely be other more empirically informed options for people. And I think it would be nice if more of the science on addiction could be incorporated into AA. But I think part of the cultishness of the program is that it does play such a central role in our society that maybe some scientists are like afraid to step on AA's toes, you know?
I don't see that they would be. I just think that more so because everything is controlled by like pharmaceutical companies. The people who like make money want people to be addicted to things. They don't want people to improve. So like the best possible option we have is like a low budget option, because billionaires want people in a place where they can control them. And so if we were to do more research on how to solve addiction, we could potentially solve homelessness, and therefore we would solve the problem of...
Oh my God. But now this has devolved into like conspiracy theories about the elites. Like they all want to keep us sick. They always want to keep us
like
addicts.
high key, I feel like they don't don't want to fix the problem because that's how they like have control over society. And if we fix addiction, we fix a lot of mental health problems, which means we fix a lot of homelessness. It's like if we wanted to, we could. You know what I mean?
This all feels a little conspiratorial, but
Yeah,
I know
sorry.
what you're saying. I know what you're saying. I was reading a piece in the New York Post, not a particularly prestigious publication, that was saying that because of AA's dominance, many doctors and scientists wouldn't even consider studying alternatives to AA.
Yeah, because they just don't see the value in it.
I think it's partially AA's fault that they don't see the value in it.
Yeah, because they think that it works really well.
Because enough studies have not been done. I think these studies should have been done long ago, and they're only starting to be done now. It's like, why wouldn't we all want to solve addiction? Even if AA didn't become like the star in our society that it is, like, wouldn't we all be better for it? I don't know.
Yeah, I think we would. I just think even if we do a bunch of research, there will never be just one solution because everyone is so
for sure
individual, and so like it's just so costly for scientists and then ultimately society to create various options.
I think it's sad.
I agree.
I think it's really sad because that just doubles down on the idea that addiction is a moral failing and it's a problem with your soul. And if you can just find God, then you'll be fine.
No, I agree. I don't think it's okay that it's like our main option right now. I think there should be more options for different kinds of people. And hopefully there will be.
Yeah, and we're really grateful for our listeners who encouraged us to do a part 2. We hope that this created more of a balanced view on the topic. It's obviously an incredibly complex one and it is above our pay grade, but thank you again.
Yeah, thanks for listening. I feel like this should be a case study like that we refer back to for all of our future episodes because it does fall on such a thin line.
Yeah. You know, we're fans of spectrums here, and I think addiction is a spectrum, just like cults are a spectrum.
Yeah.
And that's our show.
Thanks so much for listening.
We'll be back with a new cult next week.
But in the meantime,
stay culty, but not too culty. Sounds Like a Cult is created, hosted, and produced by Amanda Montel and Isa Medina. Kate Elizabeth is our editor.
Our podcast studio is All Things Comedy, and our theme music is by Casey Kolb. Thank you to our intern/production assistant, Noemi Griffin. Subscribe to Sounds Like a Cult wherever you get your podcasts, so you never miss an episode.
And if you like our show, feel free to give us a rating and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and check us out on Patreon at patreon.com/soundslikeacult.